Hello everyone, I am the Meta Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck checks. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the All-Will-Be-One Commander Precons, Vishgraz the Doomhive. If you like this deck running the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'd really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Vishgraz is a 3/3 Phyrexian insect with Menace and Toxic 1 for 2 generic, 1 white, 1 black, and 1 green. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you create 3 1/1s with Toxic 1 that can't block. Them having Toughness 1 and being both an artifact and a creature is going to matter, which we'll soon see enough in a video. Right off the bat, Toxic 1 matters for Vishgraz itself since it gets +1/+1 for each poison counter your opponents have. So the more you spread the love in terms of poison counters, the bigger Vishgraz is going to be. Just keep in mind that once an opponent loses and leaves the game, Vishgraz will get smaller because there will be less poison counters in the game. But that's fine since you should have it in the bag by then. No surprise then that this deck is going to care about poison counters. While a controversial topic at large, I personally don't care about any strategy so long as everyone's keeping in mind the expectations of the group. If everyone's playing with the same mindset and within the same power levels, it shouldn't matter. In any case, let's see how else the deck expects to get poison counters on our opponents. Necrogen Communion, Prosthetic Injector, and Snake Cult Initiation make it so the attached creature gives the defending player poison counters upon successful combat damage. Depending on the situation, this is slightly better than Infect because if the attached creature dealt only 1 point of combat damage, the opponent still gets the numbered amount of poison counters. Best of all, if attached to a creature that already has Toxic, multiple instances of Toxic can stack. Important to note is that Poisonous 3 is mechanically identical to Toxic but with a different name, so anything that synergizes with Toxic will not synergize with Poisonous. Necrogen Rot Priest, Slaughter Singer, Tyrannex Rex, Excel Scion of Atraxa, and Scroll of Defector Might, like Vishgraz, are the creatures with Toxic already on them. Again, depending on the situation, Toxic could be better than Infect. In any case, the Rot Priest has our creatures with Toxic give an additional poison counter, which is absolutely amazing here. It even counts itself, so it's almost like it's Toxic 3. If that wasn't all, it can also give Death Touch to a creature with Toxic. This makes an opponent think twice about blocking or losing a blocker in combat. Super good. So good in fact that we're going to talk about Death Touch in greater detail in a bit. Slaughter Singer also boosts our creatures with Toxic by giving them +1/+1 when they attack. Since the deck creates a ton of tokens, which we'll soon see, being able to make those Phyrexian Mites get +1/+1 will definitely add up. And not just the Mites, but any other creature with Toxic, like Tyrannex Rex. This thing is a beast. It can't be countered, has Ward 4, Trample, and Haste. With 8 power, it'll more than likely get at least 1 damage through, giving the defending player 4 poison counters more often than not. This thing is just here for how good it is at what it does, which is just blindly attacking. Ixal is also a good attacker since it has Flying and Vigilance. Best of all, it's relatively cheap to cast and provides card advantage. Since we're spreading as many poison counters as we can, chances are we'll be stealing the top card from all opponents during our end step. Scroll is pretty much a Phyrexian Might on steroids and quite busted in the deck. For 2 life and tapping, you have a sort of Mother of Runes type effect but better, since it also gives that creature Toxic 1. Being able to protect any key creature is already good, but giving a game-ending attacker hexproof and unblockable by a certain color is great at getting that win. Speaking of protecting our creatures, Archetype of Endurance does an amazing job at it. While Scroll has Toxic 1, we're not really going to be attacking with it so much as keeping it up to protect any of our creatures. But with the Archetype in play, we don't have to worry about it. It is quite costly to cast, but it's green, so it's easy to ramp into it. Clever Concealment, Teferi's Protection, Flawless Maneuver, and Heroic Intervention also protect our board at a much lower CMC. These are especially important in decks like this one where you have a lot of tokens swinging in to overwhelm the board. But we'll see those in a bit. Back to giving opponents poison counters, the deck is running Finn the Fangbearer. Whenever a creature with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, they get 2 poison counters. This also counts himself. However, with Necrogen Rot Priest giving Death Touch to a creature with Toxic, it can stack. Better yet, the deck has plenty of other ways of giving Death Touch to our creatures. Archetype of Finality, both Nylea and Oran Frostfang are included because we also want to put opponents in difficult positions. Do they take the poison counters or do they trade their creatures for our tokens? The deck is very aggressive, so trading weak creatures for key creatures is amazing. Plus, with Finn, those attackers with temporary Death Touch will still give the defending player 2 poison counters. The bow is also good on its own for other things since it has 4 modes that are all great depending on the situation. These Swiss Army knife type of cards are always good. However, Oran Frostfang is the best of these because it also draws us cards. The amount of cards this draws us is insane. Same with the other similar cards in the deck like Toski Bearer of Secrets, Tadius Juniper Ascendant, and Timna the Weaver. Of these, Toski is the one most like the Frostfang since it triggers per creature connecting and not per opponent hit. As a bonus, it also has Indestructible. Tadius and Timna can only ever get us 3 cards per combat though, but that's still 3 cards per combat, which is nothing to scoff at. As a bonus, Tadius also has Reach and Hexproof when not attacking. Phyrexian Arena is also included for card draw. Best of all, with the new art for it, it's quite on flavor with the deck too. It's not as impacting as the previous 4 cards, but it's still free card draw every turn. That being said, Skull Clamp is possibly the best one here. All the tokens created have 1 toughness, so whenever we need to draw cards we could just pay 1 and lose a token to do so. Poor tokens. They must all hate Skull Clamp, as do our opponents. Back to giving Death Touch, Archetype of Courage is an amazing card to include here as well. If our creatures had both Death Touch and First Strike, they'll kill whatever they block or whatever blocks them. This is useful way often than not, especially since clearing the way of blockers means being able to Alpha Strike the opponent in the next turn. The rest of the poison counter effects in the deck are via Infect. Skithiryx the Blight Dragon, Flesh Eater Imp, and Ichmoth Nexus are the deck's Infect creatures. There aren't that many Infect creatures in the deck since there's a lot more synergy to be had with Toxic. That being said, they are still amazing to have since all 3 of them fly. Skithiryx can also regenerate, which is amazing. Flesh Eater Imp has the potential of one-shotting an opponent if it gets through. You could just sacrifice as many creatures as needed to pump it up to give enough poison counters to kill that opponent. Ichmoth Nexus doesn't even take up a slot in the deck for being a mana-generating land that doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. Grafted Exoskeleton, Phyresis, and Tainted Strike can give Infect to the creature they're attached to. These end games. While the salt level for these are quite high, games do need to end. While there aren't many creatures big enough to end the game in one fell swoop with these, they're still worth including, especially since Infect doesn't override Toxic and vice versa. For example, if a creature had both Infect and Toxic, then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they'll get a poison counter for each point of combat damage they would have received, but then they still get as many poison counters due to Toxic. Super busted. Sidar Kondo of Jamara and Rogue's Passage are included as ways to make sure our Toxic creatures get through. Almost all Toxic creatures and tokens in the deck are 2 power or less, so Sidar essentially makes them unblockable. Rogue's Passage can make any creature unblockable, which is great for our commander when it starts getting big enough. Best of all, it doesn't even take up a slot in the deck. We can also just create new creatures that can give poison counters thanks to token creation effects. Creating tokens that can give our opponents poison counters is another way to get it done, so the deck is also running Infested Fleshcutter, Might Overseer, and Squalf's Hive. These create Phyrexian Might tokens, which are the deck's main tokens. These are the best tokens since the deck has synergy with the Toxic keyword, plus they're small enough to get through with Sidar Kondo and be equipped with Skull Clamp. Might Overseer is also another way to give First Strike, at least to our creature tokens, so it's another way to make the most of the Death Touch effects in the deck. Squall's Hive can also give lifelink to our creatures with Toxic, so long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters on them, which will be more often than not. Serpent Generator also creates similar tokens, but they don't have Toxic. It does cost a whopping 6 mana to cast and 4 to activate, but it's essentially the same thing. It creates a 1/1 artifact creature token that gives an opponent a poison counter when it deals combat damage to them. Them being artifact creatures is important, which we'll soon see. Plus, you can also get some hipster points since I doubt many players have even ever heard of this card before. Phyrexian Swarmlord also creates a bunch of 1/1 creature tokens since it depends on how many poison counters our opponents have. These are just creature tokens, but they do have Infect, which is still very useful. Swarmlord itself also has Infect as a bonus. The deck also increases the number of tokens created too. Thanks to Mondrak Glory Dominus, Anointed Procession, Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, and Primal Vigor doubling our token production, the deck gets insane even more quickly. We've already seen how many Phyrexian Might tokens the deck can create, well imagine doubling them, or quadrupling them, or even octupling them if we controlled at least 3 of these cards. Best of all, the first one has a built-in way to become indestructible. All that instant speed for at least 1 mana and 4 life. You do need to sacrifice 2 other artifacts and or creatures, but hey, that's what the Phyrexian Mights are for. While the deck is dedicated to getting poison counters onto our opponents, once they have poison counters, we can continue giving them additional poison counters via other means, specifically via proliferating those poison counters. Since the deck is so aggressive, Sword of Truth and Justice, Bloated Contaminator, Contaminant Grafter, and Norn's Choirmaster are amazing includes. The first 3 require dealing combat damage to the defending player, and while Norn's Choirmaster simply requires us to attack with our commander, regardless if it connects or not. As a bonus, the sword puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature before proliferating. It also gives +2/+2 and protection from 2 relevant colors. Bloated Contaminator and Contaminant Grafter also have Toxic as a bonus, making them poison counter sources as well. Staff of Completion, Plague Maw Beast, and Throne of Get can proliferate with much less effort though, since they just require activating. Best of all, they don't require paying any mana. Sure, they do so by tapping, limiting how many times we can do it per turn, but at least the staff can be untapped for 5 mana if you really wanted to. It can also be used to destroy anything of ours that was stolen, adding mana or drawing us a card. This card is crazy good. The beast requires sacrificing a creature to proliferate, while the throne requires an artifact. And this is why it's so great that the Phyrexian Mites, being creatures, are both artifacts and creatures. That way we can sacrifice them to either of these outlets in order to proliferate. Vraska Betrayal Sting is another free way to proliferate thanks to her 0 loyalty ability. Technically, this will also plus her 1 since we can choose her to proliferate her loyalty counters. If not weren't enough, her other abilities are relevant too, with the -2 ability being similar to Oko's Elking ability. Her -9 isn't that needed considering how many sources we have of putting poison counters on opponents. But if we needed to, we have access to it. Contagion Clasp, Contagion Engine, and Karn's Bastion also proliferate via activated abilities, but these require mana to activate. At least the Contagion artifacts put -1/-1 counters on creatures too, which is a great way of getting rid of them. In order to compensate for its casting cost, Contagion Engine proliferates twice on activation. Karn's Bastion doesn't take up a slot in the deck since it's a mana generating land that enters the battlefield untapped. Speaking of lands, Evolution Sage is an amazing card for proliferation. Since its landfall trigger is what does the proliferating, this functions with literally 0 effort. The deck is already running all 9 fetch lands, which it was going to anyways, since the deck's running all 3 shock lands, all 3 slow duels, and all 3 snow duels, plus Murmuring Bosk and Indatha Triome. But at least these will trigger Evolution Sage twice on their own, so the fetch lands are even better here thanks to it. Same with the rest of the ramp effects the deck has. Sword of Hearth and Home and Sword of the Animus being able to ramp us for a basic land each combat is amazing. Sword of Hearth and Home requires connecting, but at least it gives the equipped creature +2/+2 and protection from relevant colors. Just keep in mind that the deck is mostly white and green, so whatever is equipped with it cannot be targeted by our own spells and effects in those colors. In any case, this sword does double work here since it also blinks a creature. Blinking our commander will give us more Phyrexian Might creature tokens. Amazing. Farseek Nature's Lore 3 visits into the north and Rampant Growth are also included because land-based mana acceleration is the best kind of mana acceleration since most commander players refuse to run mass land destruction effects. So while good on their own, they're even better here if we had Evolution Sage in play. Apart from the previously mentioned snow duels, the deck's also running 3 copies of each snow-covered basic land to maximize into the north, as well as all of the basic land ramp effects in the deck along with the fetch lands. Glistening Sphere also helps proliferate while providing mana acceleration. However, it only proliferates when it enters the battlefield. That's fine since it has the potential of tapping for 3 mana more often than not. A 3 CMC mana rock that taps for 3 is still amazing. Even with Soul Ring being the only other mana rock in the deck, plus all the previously seen mana acceleration, the Sphere still has its uses and is worth including. Some more one-time only proliferation effects can be found on Wanderer's Strike. Yes, it costs a whopping 5 mana to cast and it's a sorcery, making it slow as well. However, with all of the mana ramp the deck has, it's not that bad. Plus it exiles the creature, which is great at indestructible targets as well as against bombs from Reanimator decks. The deck still has the best cheap instant speed removal like Beast Within, Generous Gift, and Utter End, as well as Vindicate, which even though is a sorcery, is still amazing at getting rid of anything. These cards should be included here, regardless. Another amazing sorcery speed removal effect in the deck is White Sun's Twilight. Granted, it's the only mass removal effect in the deck, but that's because the deck is aggro and we don't want the board to be wiped often, especially when we have combat-based ways of getting rid of blockers and other creatures. But what's best about this card is that if we did have to wipe the board, we pay 5 for X and then we create X Phyrexian Might tokens giving us a fresh board of toxic creatures, or even more if we paid for more than 5 for X. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. Apart from the previously mentioned lands, the deck is running Command Tower and Ancient Tomb. Can't go wrong with these, especially the gold bordered version of Ancient Tomb, since it's usually around just $20. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Vishgraz the Doomhive. The deck is not for the faint of heart. You can very easily take out an opponent from out of nowhere, but at the same time, your opponents are going to know what you're going to be doing from the get-go. Once they see Vishgraz in your command zone, you might become public enemy number 1 before the game even starts. So you need to be very aggressive with the deck, as well as keep your protective spells and effects available. Try not to go too hard, too fast, since you will almost always need to keep mana open and available for these protective spells. That being said, the deck is still pretty fun because it's incredibly synergistic. If you're interested in the deck list of the spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.